Thank you. As we had discussed earlier, my name is Wilfred Onkyo to be taking you through this topic 2 of geography of hazards. As we had discussed earlier about the introduction about hazard, now we are going to go about the spatial and temporal variation of hazards. And in the introduction, this lesson examines the spatial and temporal variation in the impact of hazards, the occurrence and the vulnerability of society are becoming more vulnerable, evident in the nature, distribution, and the impact of hazards and disaster worldwide. The lesson across these hazards also examines factors responsible for the consideration geographic variation in the occurrence and impact of hazards. Let's go to the next. Sorry about that. The objectives about these spatial, temporal, and the hazards. So we need to consider by the end of the study or the lesson, you should be able to describe the changing trends on impact of hazards, show variation in the occurrence of hydrometeorological, geological, biological, and technical hazards. Also describe responsible for this variation. Give reason for increased vulnerability of community of hazards. Let's go to the trend. Trend in impact of hazards. We can consider so many trends, but hazards are happening more openly and have a more dramatic impact on the world in terms of both their human and economic costs. Well, the number of lives lost has declined in the past 20 years from 800,000 people died from natural disaster in the 90s compared to 2 million in the 1970s. So it has declined from 2 million to 800,000. The number of people affected has risen to over 2 billion. International strategy for disaster reduction. You can see it is estimated that the total number of people affected each year by the natural disaster, that is, who at least for a time either lost their home, their crops, their animals, their livelihoods, even their family members, you can see, almost doubled between 1990 to 1999. It increased. It increased, and that led to so many. So even though the number, even though the number of disaster has more than tripled since the 1970s, the report death total toll has decreased to less than half, indicate that some degree mitigation and earlier warning provision may be having an impact. So maybe some people have been informed that there's a disaster that might happen, like maybe an earthquake. There's a disaster might happen very soon. So people have been uh, given these warnings and being told that prepare yourself, but because soon there's an earthquake that will happen and might affect you. Even earlier on, we were told that the El Nino will be soon here, Kenya, and it may take that period long time. So we were preparing ourselves for this El Nino. So some argue it is the changing profile of the natural disaster which affects the number of deaths. Yeah, it might be the change natural disaster. Those are people who argue like that. So I have this table, and you will just bear with me that this table might give you some hint and how this has been happening. This is a table that statistic of human and economic loss experience from recent disaster event. So we can go to the events and per year and what. So let's go to the tsunami. Year 204, Indian Ocean, place where it occurred, death to the 250,000. Homeless, there were no homeless. Economic, it lost, it cost billions of money. Yeah? Let's go to the fire sage in 204, which happened at California, USA. So 24 deaths, 3,700 were left homeless. 12 billion. It costed a lot of money. Earthquake in 203 in Bam, Iran, 41,000 deaths, 76,000 homeless, but maybe I guess it costed so many billions also. These are the trends that I was trying to tell you and show you that earthquake 1999, it happened in Turkey in 18,000 deaths, 300,000 homeless, and so many billions that the properties were affected. So you can see the table, how it describes the this. Also, can go to the next, the variation of an occurrence of variation and occurrence of this, variation and occurrence of hazard. There are considerable geographic variation in the occurrence and impact of natural hazard. Asia was affected by approximately 43% of the natural disaster in the last decade and accounted for almost 70% of all lives lost due to the natural disaster. During the two El Nino period of 1991 to 1992 and 1997 to 1998, floods in China alone affected over 200 million people. Imagine, over 200 people in each period. Nevertheless, in relative terms and considered per capita, Africa is the most heavily affected region, in particular when there's drought, epidemic like famine considered. Imagine. So we can also go to the trends in hydrometeorological hazards. Societies are increasingly affected by the interannual variation in climate, such as those affected with El Nino, La Nina, which affect precipitation and temperature of interannual time scale that are only predictable to some degree. This regional climatic shift can be produce hydroclimatic hazards, events associated with climatic variability. The prevalence of drought and flood that triggers hazards shows that many countries are vulnerable to natural climate variability and extreme projected climate change in incoming decades expected to accompany global warming are likely to change the frequency and intensity of the climatic related hazards in ways that many adversely affected some regions, although climate change from rising. So we can go back to the trend in geological hazard. Earthquake and volcanic eruption represent the classical rapid onset, sudden impact hazards, and the regional distribution of earthquake and volcanoes is closely related to the geophysical activities associated with tectonic plates, like movement of the tectonic plates here. Most of them of the world earthquake and volcano occur along the tectonically active margin of these major plates. While many tectonic hazards occur less frequently in particular places than other hazards, explosive demographic growth and rapid urbanization process increase and exposure of human beings and their economic assets. Earthquake and volcanic activity also act as triggering events for the second tertiary hazard. You can go to some of the review questions using examples. Why natural man-induced and technological hazards are increasing in society? Examine factors explain increased human and economic cost from hazards in the world. 3. Account for declining numbers of human fatalities from natural hazards. Are societies becoming more vulnerable to environmental hazard and disaster? Discuss the facts that contribute to high degree of vulnerability to disaster in development countries. So the other reference materials like Alexander David 1993 natural disaster, New York, Chapman and Hall. These are the other reference materials that you can use.